can't imagine living this way. If you had it, if it was there for you, it was because your two hands made it. And if you didn't make it, you didn't have it. On the farm, you had four basic tools. You had a hoe, which was usually a piece of metal, sometimes wood, at a 90-degree angle to the handle, which you use to get rid of the weeds. Well, why is that important? Because if the weeds come up, the weeds take the water and the nutrients out of the soil, and your crop is stunted. So you got to keep those weeds cut out of there. I remember that growing up in Greensboro, North Carolina, way out in the country there on a little place called Victory Chapel Road. Lived on a big old dairy farm. There was no longer a dairy farm, but we were renting the place, and I was surrounded by hundreds of acres of beautiful pasture land and a barn out there like a cathedral. That was the biggest barn I've ever seen in my life. 3 stories. You get in that barn and you just disappeared. It was huge. My brother and I always had a lot of fun playing in that barn. We grew up out there on Victory Chapel Road, and my dad decided one year, let's have a garden. But my dad always did things big. So we had a huge garden. And we'd come home from school, get off the school bus, walk in, grab something to drink, and there's a note on the table. Hoe the corn. Oh, that was fate worse than death. And the hoe, we had to go to the barn and grab the hoe and go out there and just chop between the stalks of corn and get it. And of course, we didn't have 2 or 3 rows of corn. My dad was trying to feed some third world country. We had rows and rows of corn. I remember my brother and I were playing in that big barn one time when we always helped the man bring his hay in, the guy that owned all that land. When he brought his hay in, we would help him bring the hay in. That was a trip. When I was a little kid, I don't know, I couldn't have been more than 10, 11 years old. My dad volunteered me to help bring in the hay. Have you ever tried to lift a bale of hay? I'm a little old bitty thing. I have arms about that big around. You're looking at me now and thinking, you've grown. Yes, I have. When I was 10, I was a little bitty skinny nothing. And Dad sent me out there in the field, and the bed of the trailer is about right here. And you have to run with the trailer and grab this bale of hay by the string on either end of it and swing it up on the trailer. And you had to keep up. The first 3 or 4, I didn't get them all the way up. I'm running into the side of the trailer. Whap! The thing's dropping. I'm trying to fell apart. Now I'm grabbing handfuls of hay and throwing it up on the trailer. And doing all. It was a horrible experience. And the man was fussing at me. Come on, son. Get over here. I'm doing the best I can. I was out there for hours. I slept well that night. It was tough. Pete and my brother and I were out in that big old barn one day, and we were playing a little hide and seek with old corn cobs. And if you stuck your head up here, you got thumped. We were throwing corn cobs at each other. Built a little fort over here and a fort over here. We're chucking corn cobs back and forth at each other. And my brother, I thought I'm going to sneak. I'm going to sneak on him. I'm going to go around this way. He thinks I'm here. And I'm going to swing around that way and get him from the side. And I jumped up to run, forgetting that we had just filled the barn with hay. So the rafters of the barn, which are about 2 feet by 2 feet rough cut lumber, are right there. They're not way up there. Right here. And I jumped up and ran right into that rafter. It caught me right across the forehead, knocked me out. Just whack. Well, my brother didn't know where I was. He was afraid to move because I was a pretty good thrower. So he called for me 2 or 3 times, didn't get an answer. He slipped down the ladder and went home. I woke up about dark in the barn. Where am I? And I went down the ladder, went to the house, had a bruise about 1 inch thick all the way across my forehead. It was like the mark of Cain on my life. My brother said, where'd you go? What happened to you? I ran into a rafter. Hoeing was part of the job. You don't get those weeds out of there, they're going to ruin your crop. Spade. What's a spade? Spade was a shovel that was straight. When you think of a shovel, you think of it comes down, and the shovel kind of turns out a little bit so you've got some leverage to pick up the dirt. Spade would kind of come straight off the handle, and it was used to almost always wooden, and was used to turn the soil. Now, you think of plowing the soil and turning the soil over, but you keep in mind the plows that turn the soil haven't been invented yet. So if you had 2 acres of land, you turned that land with a spade. You'd stick that in the ground, you'd shove it in the ground, you'd pick that up, you'd turn it over. And you do the next little piece of dirt, and the next little piece of dirt, and the next little piece of dirt. And you had to turn that soil by hand. This is hard, back-breaking labor. You had a rake. When you finally harvested, you, of course, raked whatever you are harvesting together, and you bundled it or do it in bushel baskets, whatever. A rake was always like a rake you think of today, except wooden teeth, and you had to make the pegs to make the rake. Well, what'd you harvest with? Well, you had a sickle, a hand sickle. You ever seen one? Ever seen a hand sickle? They're big. They're as tall as I am, if not taller. And the handle comes down, it kind of twists just a little bit, and then the blade is, curved. Well, actually, this way. And you have a handle here and a handle here. And this handle is about that thick. I have picked a sickle up and tried to use it a couple of times. Listen, it took a man to run a sickle all day long. It's heavy. And all you're doing is cutting. Take a step forward and cut. Take a step forward and cut. So you can cut about 2.5, maybe 3 feet at a time. So is it going to do any good planting acres of wheat? No, because you can't harvest it in time. You can only plant what you can get in a certain amount of time. If that doesn't happen, it just rots in the field. So you're thinking, why weren't farms bigger? Because they couldn't get the crop in if it was any bigger. You could only plant what you could literally harvest. And it was done by hand. It was difficult. It was a hard life. And you made the hoe, and you made the spade, and you made the rake, and you made the sickle. And if you didn't make it, you didn't have it. It was a very difficult life, but 90% of all people in the colonies were farmers.